This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast with Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. Let me take a few moments and just ask you to be sure you subscribe to our channel. Give us a like if you would. Ring the little bell there if you're looking at it on YouTube. Of course, you can also visit me on Rumble, where I post these podcasts in my Wildlife Control Consultant page with Rumble, because, you know, like with YouTube, you never know when they're going to basically deplatform you, right? Because of the censorious people that they are over there. But I digress. So if you have comments or questions about the podcast, definitely reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you if you have interests in perhaps doing some dedicated personal training, perhaps for your company, or you're looking for some ghostwriting with some manuals and things like that, or perhaps you have a book that you have inside you that you want to get written, or you have maybe a book to sell. Perhaps you came into inheritance and you want to kind of sell a book on wildlife control or trapping. I'd love to be hear about that as well, and perhaps we can talk about it. So glad to have you on board, and definitely love to hear your comments, thoughts, suggestions for future shows, because otherwise I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about. Well, in our last podcast, I talked about the Vertebrate Pest Conference, and in this podcast, I thought I would highlight one of the companies that I learned about when I was at the Vertebrate Pest Conference, and I was rather impressed. Now, we don't have feral hogs in Maine, so I've never had the pleasure or opportunity to trap one or shoot one because I've been in states where we haven't had feral hogs, or if we did, then it was illegal to hunt them because those states properly decided not to create a hunting culture, because once you start hunting feral hogs, people love to hunt them, and then they mysteriously move around the state in ways that don't require them walking, if you get what I'm saying. They tend to get help from people that put them in the back of a pickup, move them around the state so they can have other opportunities, and they're really a devastating animal. So let's talk a little bit about feral hogs. Some wildlife control operators out there are certainly doing it, but it's certainly been a pain. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit more about feral hogs. Well, this is a website from the USDA Wildlife Services, APHIS, so APHIS, USDA, United States Department of Agriculture is a big organization, and they have subgroups underneath them. And just like all governments, they branch out into different areas. And Animal Protection Health Inspection Service, that's APHIS, APHIS. Underneath them is Wildlife Services, and they have an interesting little map here. Let me try to blow this up a little bit for you. This is, if you do a little Google search, the history of feral swine in the Americas, and we're primarily interested in, of course, the United States, which is where my podcast did, but feral hogs can be a huge problem elsewhere. So let me try to blow this up a little bit. And they have these distribution maps, and so we can start with the history of feral swine. Historically, they were brought here by the conquistadors and, of course, other people that immigrated to the new world, and they are basically pigs that have been allowed to go wild. And so some of them have a Russian background, and some have, I guess, a more European background. Nevertheless, they're all destructive here, and they don't belong in North America. They're not native to North America. They were brought here by, I guess, various white people, for lack of a better word. But so if you look at this map, it shows you how feral hogs have spread across the United States, starting in 1982 primarily concentrated in the southern tier of the United States along the Gulf Coast, and then some, of course, out in the California region. And then we move fast forward to 2004 and look at how much more purple or blue, depending on how you see that, how they've expanded incredibly. You can even look up here in the state of Nebraska had some feral hogs. And then we get out to 2016. Notice how Nebraska is empty because they had a dedicated effort to eliminate the presence of feral hogs. They had some small outbreaks. Possibly some were moved there, but many of them, of course, moved across from Kansas, because you saw here below us, Kansas had some, and there was some serious money put into some aerial gunning, and I believe some trapping as well, and they got rid of them out of Nebraska. And even looks like even Kansas has done a pretty good job knocking them down as of 2016, but there's been a lot of pressure coming up from Oklahoma, and of course, it is hard to control feral hogs. It can be very expensive, and especially if you have people that are moving them around and they're not really helpful, it can be very hard for states to get rid of them. So fast forward again to 2017, and you start seeing them. Now we start getting them way up here in the New England area. It's like we saw here in 2004. Excuse me, 2004, we get a little spot up here, up in the New Hampshire, Vermont area. 2016, notice how they're more numerous up there. And then 2017, they're really kind of implanted. 2018, they're really moving along. 2019, they're still there. 2020, it looks like their numbers have dropped a little bit because the purple or blue line, depending on how you see, it's gotten a little bit thinner up there, but you can see how it has been a long road, and you can see how even places like New Mexico and Arizona have done a lot of work trying to reduce the presence of feral hogs as of 2017. Then we're getting out to 2018, of course, and you can still see the presence of feral hogs. And then 2021, we're basically where we're at here. And we even have some up there in North Dakota, believe it or not. It's a huge, huge problem. And that means for you as a wildlife control operator, for you in places where you're allowed to control feral hogs, this is an opportunity. Excuse me. So you need to plan. If you don't have feral hogs in your area, you need to be planning to see if the day comes when you would have feral hogs. Now, states like Nebraska, states like Montana, it is illegal to hunt and control feral hogs. Why? Because they don't want to create the culture for it. And other states that are smart are doing the same thing. But for those of you in those southern tier states and some of those western states where feral hogs are present, you may not have some of those restrictions. Of course, always check your local laws. And this may be something where even if you don't have feral hogs in your area and it's legal for you to do some trapping of feral hogs or shooting of feral hogs, this is something you may want to think about, a way to expand your business, and the time to prepare is before feral hogs emerge in your particular area. Now, as a side note, those of you who live in states where feral hogs occur, or you think are likely to occur, and that means any border state of a state that has feral hogs, they're likely going to spill over. This is an opportunity for you as wildlife control operators to band together and lobby the state to make sure that you as wildlife control professionals are part of the solution for this. This is different than sport hunting. You are paid professionals to remove problem animals, and you should be able to, in my opinion, be able to make money doing that. Unfortunately, a lot of wildlife control operators, and you can listen to one of my earlier podcasts where I talk about the role of organization as wildlife control operators. Unfortunately, we don't band together well, we don't lobby well, and then we wonder why when issues come up where we could provide a service and generate revenue, that as an organization we are not capable to get a place at the table. And so what state agencies do is they reach out to wildlife services. Now, I'm not here to bash wildlife services. That's probably a subject for another podcast. The relationship between wildlife services and wildlife control operators can be a good one or a tenuous one or basically a neutral one, depending on where you live within the country and your experience with them. That's not the subject here. It's not here to bash wildlife services at this particular point. My point is that if you don't organize as wildlife control operators, don't be surprised if state agencies don't think about the services that you can provide should feral hogs become an issue within your state. Hey, the government pays attention to the people who yell and yell a lot. Okay, that's just the reality of it. I didn't make the rules. Don't hate the player, hate the game, right? So this is the situation that we're in. So if you're in a situation where you are in a state where you are allowed to trap or hunt feral hogs and do so for a fee for service, you want to be paying attention to this. Or if you think they're in your state and they're maybe not in your area, this is something where you can prepare to do that. As far as costs are concerned, those are other issues. That's not going to be the subject of today's podcast. But clearly, feral hogs are a significant problem within the United States. And so for many times, when many wildlife control operators, the way to manage them for a specific client is to trap, because a lot of times we're in situations where shooting is a legitimate option, but understand that shooting sometimes can disperse sounders. Sounders are groups of pigs together. These sounders, if you shoot, sometimes that just disperses them rather than harvest them correctly, because shooting can require you to make sure you have the proper ammunition, of course, proper firearms. If you have night vision, it can be very much more involved. So a lot of us are going to be using traps as a way to manage feral hogs. And there are a variety of traps available. Let's take a look at some of those traps. I'm just simply listing some of them here using a Google search with Google Images feral hog traps. Okay, so look at what we have here. A lot of times you'll see these large round type traps. These are multiple catch traps, usually with some sort of a one-way door, or they have a lot of things now where you have an electronic door closure. So you're basically feeding the feral hogs, are getting comfortable coming into the trap, and then you have a camera on site and you make sure you can get the whole sounder, and then you press a button and the door closes. Pretty cool. That is obviously a rather expensive type trap. You have to set it up, put the posts in, you have to have the what's the word I'm looking for? You have to have the fencing material, and it's usually round because if you have it square, they will pile up into a corner and one will get out. And you need to build it strong because they will charge these fences and try to break through them. So feral hogs are pretty powerful animals, and so typically these multiple catch traps are round. But there's also traps that are designed to catch one. Here's an example of one of those traps that I have here. This is put out by Jaeger Pro. This is an organization that specializes in hog control, and there's your simple guillotine style door, and you basically feed the feral hogs. You kind of bait them in with some grain. They finally step on the treadle, and voila, they get caught. Typically a trap like this is used for capturing a single feral hog. And perhaps this would be used in an area where you're in a neighborhood, where you would use the larger multiple catch traps in areas like farms or people who have acreage. But if you're just trapping in someone's, maybe half-acre lot and they have a feral hog moving through and you're just going to catch one, then that's obviously is a trap that you would want to use. And Jaeger Pro probably should do a podcast on this company. They are a specialist within the area of feral hog removal. You may want to encounter some of their training materials and information because they specialize. I've heard the owner speak. It is an impressive thing to behold. He has quite a system, and you may want to introduce yourself to his system if you're looking to get into some eradication level philosophy of feral hogs rather than just simply harvesting. And so these These traps, of course, come in a variety of options. You have single capture traps, you have multiple catch traps. Sometimes these traps are sophisticated enough where they actually are above ground because feral hogs learn. So if you try to capture a sounder and you miss and one escapes, they get educated and then they become a little bit more trap shy. And some of them are actually designed so they will actually drop. You press a button, you have cameras, you press a button and it drops and you catch the entire sounder that way. So there's a variety of traps available. Here's one where it's basically a kind of a single door, multiple catch type trap, but you probably can catch a couple of feral hogs in here, but notice it uses sort of a push door through rather than kind of guillotine door that you would get with a treadle system. So there's a lot of ways to mix and match. The challenge with these types of traps is they're bulky, they take up an incredible amount of room, they are also heavy. And so they often won't fit in the back of your truck if you have a cap on it, for example. So you're going to have either a trailer or a dedicated vehicle where you can pile these in the back, and you're not able to get a lot of them. And so they're a hassle, okay? And so they're effective, they definitively work, and they've had a long history behind them, but they're certainly not convenient. That's where we get to this other trap. And this is called the Pig Brig. And when I saw it at the Vertebrate Pest Conference, this was the 30th Vertebrate Pest Conference that occurred in Reno just this month, and this is 2022. It uses a very ingenious 2-net system. Fascinating. So yeah, you have to have some posts. Hopefully I can blow this picture up. Yes, I can. So notice how it works. You have an outer net and then an inner net, and it's all held up with some fence posts, and then you, of course, have your staking to keep things secure. It's a high tension nylon wire. Not high tension is the wrong word. A high tensile strength nylon so that the pigs can't cut their way through it or punch their way through it. And the way it's designed is just like you have those one-way door traps that force them to lift their head to open the door up. So let me just have my hand here. And so they will lift up the door with their head, and then when they get inside, the door closes behind them. Well, instead of using something that's metal, it uses the net to do that. So you would pour the corn or whatever grain you're using and get them comfortable going in and out, and then you would sort of drop the net down, and so they would lift it up with their head, squeeze through, but then the net would drop behind them. And so if they tried to work their way out, they're literally standing on top of the net, and they don't hurt themselves because the net has some give to it. And you can catch, I think he says the most he's had catch in one of these is, I think, in the 40s, if memory serves, from what he told me on the phone. But when I looked at this, I thought, what a unique, simple idea. You're like, why didn't I think of that? Now you may say, well, Stephen, what's the big deal about this trap? Well, because this particular trap folds up into the area of sort of a large suitcase. Now think about that in terms of wildlife control operators' storage capability, right? So if you can fold this net up into I'll call it a 3x2 suitcase, maybe 3x2x2, so it's fairly substantial, but it's not something that's so unwieldy you can't throw it in the back seat of your vehicle or in the back of your truck. And then you just have your posts that you could probably put up with your ladders or strap them or just slide them in the back of your truck. You don't have this solid steel cage trap like one of these that's not going to be foldable, and it's just going to be bulky as all get out, and as well as heavy. So you could hurt yourself moving some of these things because they're so heavy. But the net obviously is going to be significantly lighter and easier to handle, and it shrinks up and takes up less storage space. Because remember, as a business person, Traps take up space, traps take up storage, and that costs you money because you're paying taxes on the land that you have, or if you're renting, you're paying often rent by the basis of square footage. So storage matters in the long term, and plus it's a matter of convenience. You could have a couple of these traps, multiple catch traps in the back of your yard, plus you're dealing with something that is relatively easy to handle. Now, what he did notice is that you can have raccoons caught in this particular trap. You say, well, why wouldn't they climb over? Well, they could climb out of it, but sometimes you can have an overhanging net at the top to keep animals from going out and over. So this is a trap, and he hasn't had anyone use it, I think, as I recall in our conversation with the owner. He hasn't had anyone use it purposely for capturing raccoons. But raccoons, of course, are attracted to grain, they're attracted to corn, and they will get inside there, and sometimes he will find raccoons in the same trap with feral hogs. So this is something that someone in the wildlife control industry may be interested in terms of perhaps using it as a raccoon trap for areas where you're looking to capture large numbers of raccoons without necessarily throwing out a lot of individual traps. Fascinating. And what does this particular trap cost? Well, according to the site, it's about $2,000 to get this trap system. Now, I would assume you have to buy the poles on yourself. So let's take a look at some of the details here. And so he has some small stakes, probably to help hold the netting down, to hold it all, but you'd have to buy your own fence posts. So he says, look at what it comes here with. And by the way, I'm making no money off of this. I offered him an interview on the podcast, but I haven't heard from him. So a lot of people, for some reason, as I've said before, are shy and they don't want to come on the podcast. So I'm not making any money of it. So I'm just basically making you, as our listeners, aware of this particular device. He says it comes with a 1 by 20 foot diameter base trap net with an easy pull cable seam, and a 1 full length sewn in bore shield, 1 hardware kit, which includes 24 ground anchors, double hooked cam straps, T-post mounts. So I guess he does have some T-posts and zip ties, and then of course the manual, and that'll all get shipped to you. Fascinating device. I would certainly encourage you to sort of check it out. If you're in a situation with feral hogs, you may want to have contact the company, check out their videos, see if this is something that could be useful for you. Certainly, if you haven't purchased anything, I would certainly encourage you to check it out, just simply because it takes up so much less room. I would love to get feedback, because this has only been out, as I understand it, for a couple of years, so it was kind of new to me. Now, I heard rumors about a specific trapping system that was going to revolutionize the feral hog trapping industry. But I never heard anything of it. My suspicion is that this is what they were talking about, but I can't confirm that because it's so unique, it's so simple, and in terms of costs, in terms of storage and price, the price is certainly right in my opinion. Obviously, $2,000 plus shipping is nothing to sneeze at, but again, this is a multiple catch trap. And you can be spending hundreds of dollars just getting a very large cage trap. Let's say a cage trap big enough to capture a dog, for instance, can be well into the couple $100s for that sort of trap. So we could do that number just looking here. Let's go to Tomahawk. I have had a relationship with Tomahawk Live Trap in the past, and certainly they sell my books, which I'm certainly grateful for. But let's take a look at some of their equipment. Let's take a look at dog traps. Now here we have a rather large, this is for bobcat, fox, small dog, and that's $158 right there. Now if we go to even larger, like a large dog trap, that's $334. Okay, so let's take a look at this. And here so $2,000 for a multiple catch feral hog trap. That's not outrageous. And when you consider the convenience, and you can't break this trap down. This is a solid wall trap, where the feral hog trap you can. Let's see if they offer a feral hog trap. And it doesn't appear that they do. At least nothing came up here. They have some larger traps, but if you're going to use one of these cages, you'd want to make sure your trap is pretty strong. So let's do another search on feral hog traps and see what comes up in terms of dealer. Here we have Mississippi State. They talk about the variety of traps available. And here they have the pros and cons of using a box trap, and so you could definitely check that out as well. Here's one made out of wood. Here you have some circular ones and some square ones, and you have the corral traps, of course. Fascinating, because there's a lot of work being done on feral hogs, to be sure. And feral hog traps are certainly expensive. Let's see if we get something here on the corral hog trap. Here we are at Tractor Supply, and what are they charging for their feral hog trap? They won't give you a price. Let's see. This one's $400. But again, it doesn't break. It doesn't break down. Okay, so this is something definitely to think about. Or you could buy the hog trap and gate and create your own fence. So there's some options. Nevertheless, you may want to check out the Pig Brig trap system, and you would just look it up, do a little Google search at Pig Brig trap systems at pigbrig.com. And Brig is just like prison, PIGBRIG.com, pigbrig.com, and check it out, and you may find this is something useful for your particular business, or if you're looking to get into feral hog control, another tool in the toolbox for you to consider that may fit the needs that you have depending on the level of volume you have. But check it out. Love to get your comments. Of course, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your comments if you've used this trap, positive or negative. Again, I don't make any money or lose any money based on this particular trap. I just thought I would make you aware of it. Love to get your comments on shows. If ideas for future shows, you can definitely reach out to me. And of course, if you're looking for consulting or books or writing, ghostwriting, that you can certainly reach out for me for that. Perhaps you have a PowerPoint presentation that you need to give and you want someone to kind of give it a once over and to help you with some layout and design issues. You can certainly reach out to me again. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Well, you've been listening to Stephen Vantassel, Living the Wildlife, as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. And why do we call it the Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.